The dusty street of Bentonville, Arkansas stretched before Rosa Fontaine like a gauntlet. She had no choice but to walk, her worn traveling boots kicking up small clouds with each hesitant step, as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly in the summer of 1883. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, feeling the weight of curious eyes from every storefront and wooden sidewalk, hearing the whispers that followed her like tumbleweeds in the wind. Rosa had traveled across an ocean and half a continent to reach this frontier town, fleeing the poverty and upheaval of southern Italy for the promise of something better. But the America she had imagined felt nothing like the unwelcoming faces that greeted her now. The general store loomed ahead, its painted sign proclaiming Morrison's Goods and Sundries in bold letters. Rosa took a steadying breath and pushed through the door, the bell above jangling to announce her arrival. Inside, the smell of leather, coffee, and dried tobacco filled her nostrils. 3 women in calico dresses stood near the fabric counter, their conversation halting the moment Rosa entered. The shopkeeper, a round man with spectacles perched on his bulbous nose, looked up from his ledger with an expression that wasn't quite welcoming. "Excuse me, please," Rosa said, her Italian accent coloring each syllable with musical inflections that sounded foreign to these Arkansas ears. "I am looking for work. I can clean, I can cook, I can sew very good." One of the women near the fabric counter let out a barely suppressed giggle. The tallest of them, a sharp-featured blonde with pale blue eyes, didn't bother to hide her disdain. "Well, would you listen to that, Margaret? Can barely understand a word she's saying. Sounds like she's got a mouth full of molasses," another added, her voice dripping with mockery. Maybe she should go back to wherever she crawled out from. Rosa felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of shame and anger burning in her chest. She had expected difficulty, but the casual cruelty still stung like a slap. She straightened her spine, refusing to let them see how their words wounded her. "I speak English. I work hard. That is what matters, yes." The shopkeeper cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Look, miss, I don't have nothing for you here. Times are tough, and folks prefer to hire, well, their own kind. You understand?" Rosa understood perfectly. She had heard variations of this rejection in 3 towns already. She nodded stiffly, turning toward the door with as much dignity as she could muster. The women's laughter followed her out into the bright sunlight, each peal feeling like another nail in the coffin of her hopes. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, blinking against the sudden brightness and fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Rosa had sold everything she owned to make this journey. There was no money left to return home, even if she had wanted to face that defeat. She had written such hopeful letters to her mother and sisters, promising them she would send for them once she was established. Now she couldn't even find a single day's work. "That accent of yours causing you trouble." The voice was deep and warm, with a distinctly southern drawl that somehow managed to sound kind rather than mocking. Rosa turned to find a man leaning against the post beside the general store, one boot propped casually against the wood. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were a striking gray-green color, like sage leaves after rain, and they regarded her with genuine curiosity rather than contempt. "Is not your concern," Rosa said defensively, wiping quickly at her eyes before any tears could fall. The cowboy pushed off from the post and stepped closer, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Name's Zachary Morrison. My father owns this store, though I spend most of my time working our ranch outside town. Couldn't help but overhear what happened in there. Those women should be ashamed of themselves." Rosa studied him warily, searching for any sign of mockery or ulterior motive. She had learned to be cautious of men who approached her on the street, especially in unfamiliar towns. But there was something genuine in Zachary Morrison's expression, a softness around his eyes that suggested he meant what he said. "Your father, he also does not want to hire me," she pointed out, her accent making the words come out more blunt than she intended. Zachary winced slightly. "My father's a good man, but he's afraid of what the town thinks. This is a small place and people talk, but that doesn't make what he did right." He paused, studying her face with those striking eyes. "Where are you from, if you don't mind my asking?" "Italy. A small village near Napoli." "Naples, you say in English." Rosa shifted her carpetbag to her other hand. "I came here 4 months ago. I stay with distant cousin in Little Rock, but there is no work there either. Too many people, not enough jobs. I think maybe smaller town is better, but—" She gestured helplessly at the store behind them. "But small towns can be even harder for strangers," Zachary finished for her. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands as he thought. "What kind of work are you looking for? Anything honest? I can cook Italian food, American food. I learn quick. I can clean houses, wash clothes, take care of children. In my village, I help my mother with everything. We were poor, but we work hard." Zachary's expression grew thoughtful. "Can you cook for a lot of people? I'm talking about feeding a dozen ranch hands 3 meals a day." Rosa's heart leaped with sudden hope. "Yes, of course. How many is dozen? 12. Is no problem. I cook for big family all my life." A slow smile spread across Zachary's face, transforming his features from merely handsome to genuinely captivating. "Well, Miss Fontaine, Rosa Fontaine." "Miss Fontaine, it seems like fate brought you to Bentonville today. Our ranch cook quit 2 weeks ago after a disagreement with my foreman, and we've been limping along with whoever can throw together beans and biscuits. The men are about ready to mutiny. If you're willing, I can offer you the job. It comes with room and board in the cookhouse, plus $40 a month. $40 a month." Rosa's mind raced with the calculations. That was more money than she had dared hope for. With careful saving, she could send for her family within a year, maybe less. But she forced herself to be cautious. "Why you help me? You do not know me." Zachary met her eyes directly. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He paused, a slight color rising to his cheeks beneath his tan. "Because your voice is the sweetest I've heard in a long time. All these folks making fun of how you talk, they're fools. You sound like music, like something beautiful and different in a place that's gotten too comfortable with being the same." Rosa felt her breath catch in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. In her village, she had been just another poor girl. On her journey, she had been an obstacle, a problem, something to be endured or avoided. But this cowboy with the kind eyes looked at her like she was something precious. "I take the job," she said quickly, before he could change his mind or before she could wake up and find this was just a cruel dream. "When I start, how about right now? I rode into town for supplies. We can load up the wagon and head back to the ranch before dark. It's about an hour's ride northwest of here." Zachary placed his hat back on his head, that warm smile still playing around his lips. "I should warn you, though, the men can be rough around the edges. They're good workers and decent enough once you get to know them, but they're not used to fancy manners." "I am not fancy either," Rosa assured him. "I just want to work." They spent the next hour loading supplies into Zachary's wagon. He introduced her properly to his father inside the store, and though the elder Morrison looked skeptical, he didn't countermand his son's decision. Rosa caught the sharp-featured blonde woman watching them through the store window, her expression sour with disapproval. Rosa lifted her chin and ignored her, focusing instead on securing the flour sacks and crates of canned goods. As they rolled out of Bentonville, the town giving way to rolling prairie dotted with oak and hickory trees. Zachary pointed out landmarks and told her about the ranch. The Morrison spread covered 3,000 acres of good grazing land, with about 500 head of cattle and a dozen horses. Zachary's grandfather had founded it 30 years earlier, and his father had built it into one of the most successful operations in Benton County. "So you inherit all this one day?" Rosa asked, genuinely curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "That's the plan, though my father's still young enough and stubborn enough to run things for a long while yet. I'm learning the business, managing the day-to-day operations and the men. It's a good life, but it can be lonely." He glanced at her sideways. "You have family back in Italy, my mother and 2 younger sisters. My father, he died 5 years ago. After that, things get very hard. No money, no food sometimes. My mother, she save everything so I can come to America. The plan is I work, I save, I send for them." Rosa's voice caught slightly on the words. "But that plan, it look impossible until today." "You'll get them here," Zachary said with quiet confidence. "You strike me as someone who doesn't give up easy." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically, and the horses' hooves clopping steadily against the packed dirt road. The landscape was beautiful in its own way, so different from the rocky coastal hills of her homeland. Everything here felt bigger, wider, more open. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, painted in shades of blue and gold as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "Why you not married?" Rosa asked suddenly, then immediately wished she could take the question back. It was too forward, too personal for someone she had just met. But Zachary didn't seem offended. He chuckled softly. "Wondering if I'm some kind of ogre that no woman will have." "No, no," Rosa said quickly, feeling her cheeks heat. "I just think you seem kind, you are not ugly, you have good ranch. Seems like women would be interested." "Well, thank you for the assessment that I'm not ugly," Zachary said with amusement in his voice. "Truth is, I was engaged a few years back. Girl named Caroline Fletcher, daughter of a banker in Fayetteville. Beautiful girl, came from a good family. Everyone thought we were perfect together." "What happened?" Rosa asked softly. Zachary's expression grew more serious. "I realized we didn't actually like each other very much. She wanted to marry a ranch owner, someone who could give her a big house and status in the community. I wanted to marry someone who actually cared about me, not just what I could provide. When I called off the engagement, she told the whole town I had dishonored her. Caused quite a scandal. That must have been difficult. It was the right decision, though. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees me as a means to an end." He looked at her again, and Rosa felt something flutter in her chest at the intensity of his gaze. "What about you? Did you leave someone behind in Italy?" Rosa shook her head. "There was a boy, Luca. He worked on a farm near my village. We were friends since children. Maybe it would have become something more, but then his family moved north looking for work, and I decided to come to America. Sometimes I wonder what happened if I stay, but mostly I think this was the right choice, even with all the difficulty." "Well, I'm glad you made it here," Zachary said quietly. "Today, anyway." The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. It was more extensive than Rosa had imagined, with a large main house painted white with green shutters, a massive barn, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance, cattle dotting the grasslands. The cookhouse was a separate building near the bunkhouse, with a stone chimney and windows on 3 sides to let in light and air. Several men emerged from various buildings as the wagon rolled into the yard. They were a rough-looking bunch, ranging in age from barely 20 to weathered 50, all with the lean, sun-hardened look of men who worked outdoors from dawn until dusk. their curious and skeptical stares fixed on Rosa as Zachary helped her down from the wagon. "Listen up," Zachary called out, his voice taking on an authoritative tone that made the men snap to attention. "This is Miss Rosa Fontaine. She's our new cook, and I expect you all to treat her with respect. Anyone who doesn't will answer to me personally. Is that clear?" A chorus of "yes, boss," and "sure thing," Zach rippled through the group. One man, tall and broad-shouldered with a thick mustache, stepped forward. "No disrespect intended, boss, but can she actually cook? We've been eating Cole's attempts at biscuits for 2 weeks, and I think my stomach's staging a rebellion." "She can cook," Zachary said firmly. Then he looked at Rosa with a slight smile. "Want to prove it to them?" Rosa squared her shoulders and looked directly at the skeptical cowboys. "I make you dinner tonight, tomorrow breakfast. If you do not like my food, I leave with no complaint. If you like it, you eat and you are grateful. Deal?" A younger cowboy with red hair and freckles grinned. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that. You're on, miss. What do you say, boys?" The general consensus seemed favorable, and Rosa felt some of her nervousness ease. These were working men, not so different from the laborers and farmers she had known in Italy. They respected hard work and plain speaking. If she could prove herself useful, they would accept her. Zachary showed her to the cookhouse, carrying her carpetbag inside. The building was larger than she had expected, with a big cast iron stove, long wooden work tables, shelves stocked with supplies, and a small private room off to one side with a narrow bed and a washstand. It was simple but clean, and most importantly, it was hers. "The men eat at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening," Zachary explained. "Sometimes they're out on the range and take food with them, but usually they're here for meals. There's a root cellar out back with vegetables and preserved goods, and we keep chickens for eggs. We butcher our own beef, so there's always meat available." Rosa was already mentally planning the evening meal. "How long until dinner?" Zachary pulled out his pocket watch. "About 2 hours." "Good. I need that time. You help me bring things from wagon." She didn't wait for an answer, already rolling up her sleeves and tying on the apron she found hanging by the stove. The familiar ritual of preparing to cook centered her, making everything else fade into the background. They worked together to unload the supplies, and Rosa found herself stealing glances at Zachary as they moved between the wagon and the cookhouse. He was strong but gentle, careful not to drop anything, and he seemed to anticipate what she needed before she asked. There was something deeply attractive about his quiet competence, and the way he treated her like an equal rather than a subordinate. Once everything was unloaded, Zachary lingered in the doorway. "I'll leave you to it then. If you need anything, the main house is right over there. My father and I live there along with our housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She's from San Francisco, been with us for years. I think you'll like her." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Rosa said formally, "for everything today. You saved my life, I think. Call me Zachary or Zach. Everyone does." He hesitated, then added, "And I didn't save your life, Rosa. I just gave you a chance to build a new one. You'll do the saving yourself." After he left, Rosa stood in the center of the cookhouse and took a deep breath. Then she got to work. She had 2 hours to prepare a meal that would convince a dozen hungry cowboys that she deserved to stay. No pressure, she thought with grim humor. She found salt pork in the cellar along with potatoes, onions, and canned tomatoes. In the pantry, there was flour, cornmeal, and lard. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. Rosa's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she sliced the salt pork and set it to rendering in a large skillet. While the fat melted, she peeled and diced potatoes, chopped onions until her eyes watered, and mixed up cornbread batter. The cookhouse filled with the savory smell of frying pork and onions. Rosa added the potatoes, letting them brown in the fat, then poured in the canned tomatoes along with salt, pepper, and dried herbs she found on the shelf. It was a simple dish, similar to what her mother used to make when money was tight, but it was hearty and flavorful. The cornbread went into the oven, and Rosa used the remaining time to brew a large pot of strong coffee and slice the fresh bread she found wrapped in cloth. At precisely 6 o'clock, men began filing into the cookhouse dining area, drawn by the smells wafting from the kitchen. Rosa carried out platters of the pork and potato stew and the golden cornbread, her heart pounding. This was her test, her chance to prove herself worthy of staying. The men dug in with the enthusiasm of people who had been living on inadequate food for too long. Rosa stood near the kitchen entrance, nervously watching their reactions. The first few bites were taken in silence, and then the red-haired cowboy let out a groan of pleasure. "Sweet mercy, this is good," he declared. "Boys, I think we've died and gone to heaven." "Better than anything we've had in months," another agreed, already reaching for seconds. "Miss Fontaine, you've got yourself a job if you want it." The mustached man who had challenged her earlier raised his coffee cup in salute. "I stand corrected. Welcome to the Morrison Ranch, miss." Rosa felt a wave of relief so intense it made her knees weak. She had done it. She had a job, a home, a future. When she glanced toward the door, she saw Zachary standing there, watching the scene with undisguised satisfaction and something else in his eyes, something warmer and more personal that made her pulse quicken. He caught her eye and mouthed, "I told you so." Rosa couldn't help but smile back. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rosa woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, fed the men at noon, and had dinner ready promptly at 6. In between, she baked bread, prepared supplies for the men working distant pastures, and kept the cookhouse spotlessly clean. The work was exhausting, but it was honest and purposeful in a way that made her feel useful and valued. The cowboys, initially skeptical, became her unlikely champions. They bragged about her cooking to anyone who would listen, and were fiercely protective if anyone from town said anything disparaging about her accent or foreign ways. The red-haired one, whose name was Tommy Baker, appointed himself her unofficial guardian, always ready to carry heavy pots or fetch supplies from the cellar. But it was Zachary who occupied most of Rosa's thoughts. He made a habit of stopping by the cookhouse at odd hours, ostensibly to check on supplies or discuss menu plans, but their conversations always drifted to other topics. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his desire to try new breeding techniques he had read about in agricultural journals. She told him about Italy, about the blue Mediterranean Sea and the ancient ruins, about her sisters and the way her mother sang while she worked. One evening about a month after her arrival, Zachary appeared just as Rosa was finishing the dinner cleanup. The other men had retired to the bunkhouse, and the cookhouse was quiet except for the crackling fire in the stove. "Busy?" he asked from the doorway. Rosa looked up from the pot she was scrubbing. "Always busy, but I can take a break. You want coffee?" "Actually, I was hoping you might want to take a walk. It's a beautiful evening and you've been working since before sunup." Rosa hesitated. She was tired, and there was bread dough she needed to prepare for tomorrow's baking, but the hope in Zachary's eyes was impossible to resist. "Just a short walk," she agreed. They strolled away from the ranch buildings toward a small creek that ran along the property's northern edge. The sun had set, but the sky still glowed with purple and gold light. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. Crickets sang in the gathering darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed softly. "You miss it?" Zachary asked. "Italy, I mean." Rosa considered the question carefully. I miss the people, my family, my friends. I miss the food from home, the olives and fresh fish and lemons growing on trees. But I do not miss being poor, do not miss feeling like there is no hope for better life. Here I have hope. That is worth everything I left behind. You're remarkable, you know that. Zachary stopped walking and turned to face her. In the dim light, his eyes looked darker, more intense. You've been in this country less than half a year, in this town for barely a month, and you've already made yourself indispensable. The men love you. My father, who never admits when he's wrong, told me last week that hiring you was the best decision I'd made since taking over management of the ranch. Rosa felt heat rise to her cheeks. I just do my job. It's more than that. You do everything with this incredible spirit, this determination. Even when those women in town were mocking you, you didn't break down. You just kept going. He reached out and gently touched her arm. Rosa, I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right moment, but I don't think there is a right moment for this kind of thing. Rosa's heart began to pound. She had felt the growing connection between them, the way their hands would brush when he helped her with supplies, the way his eyes would seek her out across the ranch yard. But she had told herself it was foolish to hope for more. She was an immigrant cook with nothing to her name. He was the heir to a successful ranch, educated and respected in the community. What you need to tell me, she asked softly. I'm falling in love with you, Zachary said simply. Maybe I started falling the moment I heard you standing up to those cruel women in town. Or maybe it was when I heard your voice and thought it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I know it's complicated. I know people will talk, that there are differences between us. But I also know that I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I think maybe you might feel something too. Rosa couldn't speak for a moment. Her throat felt tight with emotion. Zachary, I am nobody. I come from nothing. You could have any woman you want, someone from good American family, someone who speaks perfect English. I don't want any woman, I want you. Rosa Fontaine, who makes the best cornbread I've ever tasted and sings in Italian while she works. Rosa, who sends almost every penny she earns back to her family. Rosa, who looks at the world with such determination and hope that it makes me want to be a better man. He took both her hands in his. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel. Tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks before she could stop them. I feel the same, she whispered, but I am scared. What if people make trouble? What if your father disapproves? I cannot lose this job, Zachary. My family depends on me. My father won't disapprove, I promise you that. As for the town, let them talk. They'll talk regardless. The question is whether we're going to let their narrow-mindedness rob us of something real and good. He reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. Can I court you properly? Take you for drives. Let people see that I'm serious about you. Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. Then Zachary leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet, and Rosa felt like her heart might burst from the sheer rightness of it. This tall cowboy with the kind eyes and gentle hands, this man who had seen value in her when everyone else saw only a foreigner to be mocked, was choosing her. It felt like a miracle. The courtship that followed was both wonderful and challenging. Zachary was true to his word, treating Rosa with obvious affection and respect. On Sunday afternoons, her only time off, he would drive her into Bentonville in an open buggy, ensuring that everyone saw them together. They would walk through the town square, attend church services, and occasionally stop at the ice cream parlor for a treat. The reactions were mixed. Some townspeople were scandalized, whispering behind their hands about the Morrison boy throwing himself away on a foreign cook. The sharp-featured blonde woman from the general store, whose name Rosa learned was Evelyn Pritchard, made it her personal mission to spread rumors about Rosa's supposed unsuitability. But others, particularly the working-class families and the few other immigrants in the area, looked on with approval and even pride. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper at the main house, became an unexpected ally and friend. The Chinese woman had faced her own share of prejudice and understood what Rosa was experiencing. She gave Rosa advice on navigating American social customs and shared recipes that blended Eastern and Western cooking traditions. The two women often sat together on Sunday afternoons, drinking tea and talking about their homelands. The narrow minds will always find something to criticize, Mrs. Chen said one day, her English precise and only slightly accented. If it is not your birthplace, it will be your religion or your family or the way you wear your hair. You cannot live your life trying to please such people. You must live for yourself and those you love. Rosa took the advice to heart. She continued to work hard, to perfect her English while retaining the musical accent that Zachary loved, and to save her money. 6 months after arriving at the ranch, she had enough to send for her mother and sister's passage from Italy. The day she posted the letter with the money order enclosed, Zachary found her crying happy tears in the cookhouse. "They are coming," she told him, her face radiant despite the tears. "My family, they will be here in America. Because of you, because of this job you give me." "Because of you," Zachary corrected, pulling her into his arms. "Because you worked yourself to exhaustion every single day, because you refused to give up. I'm so proud of you, Rosa." That evening, Zachary asked her to marry him. There was no elaborate proposal, no ring yet, just the two of them standing in the cookhouse as the last light faded from the sky. But it was perfect because it was real and honest and full of love. "I know your family should be here," Zachary said. "I know traditionally I should ask your mother's permission. But Rosa, I can't wait any longer. I want to marry you, build a life with you. Will you be my wife?" "Yes," Rosa said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married in a simple ceremony 3 months later, after Rosa's mother and sisters arrived in Bentonville. Rosa Fontaine, still young at 42 but worn from hardship and travel, wept when she saw the ranch and understood what her daughter had built for them. Rosa's sisters, Lucia age 16 and Sophia age 14, stared in wonder at the vast Arkansas landscape so different from their coastal village. The wedding took place at the ranch rather than in town, a decision that avoided potential controversy while allowing all their true friends to celebrate with them. The Cowboys decorated the barn with wildflowers and ribbon, and Mrs. Chen prepared a feast that combined American, Italian, and Chinese dishes in a glorious fusion. Tommy Baker gave Rosa away since her father was gone, his freckled face solemn with the weight of the honor. Evelyn Pritchard and her circle of friends boycotted the wedding, of course, but Rosa found she didn't care. Looking around at the assembled guests, the Cowboys who had become like brothers, the immigrant families from town who had braved social disapproval to attend Mrs. Chen, and the elder Morrison who had grown to genuinely appreciate his son's choice, Rosa felt only gratitude and joy. When Zachary slipped the simple gold band on her finger and promised to love her for the rest of his days, Rosa knew she had found her home. Not just a place but a person, someone who saw her completely and loved her not despite her differences but because of them. "I love you, Rosa Morrison," Zachary whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. "I love you too," Rosa replied, her accent wrapping around the English words like a caress. Forever. The first year of marriage brought adjustments and challenges. Rosa continued cooking for the ranch hands, though Zachary insisted on hiring an assistant to reduce her workload. Her mother and sisters moved into a small house in town that Zachary helped them purchase, and Maria found work as a seamstress while the girls attended school. Lucia, bright and ambitious, declared she wanted to become a teacher. Sophia, gentle and artistic, spent hours sketching the Arkansas landscape. Rosa divided her time between the ranch and town, helping her family settle while learning to be a wife and eventually preparing for motherhood. When she discovered she was pregnant that winter, Zachary's joy was boundless. He became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more, hiring additional help, and reading every book about childbirth he could find. The baby came in late summer of 1885, a healthy boy with Zachary's gray-green eyes and Rosa's dark curls. They named him James Marcus Morrison, calling him Jamie from the start. The ranch hands treated the baby like a collective nephew, taking turns carving toys and teaching him to recognize animal sounds before he could even walk. But life on the frontier was never entirely smooth. 2 months after Jamie's birth, a severe drought struck the region. The creek that ran through the Morrison property dried to a trickle, and the grass turned brown and brittle. Cattle grew thin, and the constant worry about losing stock wore on everyone. Rosa watched Zachary struggle with decisions about which cattle to sell, how to stretch water resources, whether to take out loans to buy feed. She saw the lines of stress deepen around his eyes and felt helpless to ease his burden. But she did what she could, economizing on household expenses, preserving every scrap of food, and keeping the morale up among the men with hearty meals despite limited resources. One particularly difficult evening, Zachary came in after dark, exhausted and discouraged. They had lost 15 head of cattle that day to dehydration and starvation. Rosa set aside the shirt she was mending and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding him tight. "We will survive this," she said firmly. "We survived worse things before. You and me, we are strong together." Zachary held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You're my strength, Rosa, every day." The drought finally broke in October with 3 days of steady rain that turned the parched earth to mud and filled the creek to overflowing. The ranch had survived, though it would take time to rebuild the herd. But Zachary's leadership during the crisis earned him respect throughout the county, and the ranch hands' loyalty deepened from having weathered the hardship together. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, Rosa found herself settling more fully into American life while maintaining connections to her Italian heritage. She taught Jamie to speak both English and Italian, sang him the same lullabies her mother had sung to her, and cooked the traditional foods of her homeland alongside American staples. Zachary learned to love pasta e fagioli as much as beef stew, and the ranch hands became adventurous eaters under Rosa's influence. The town of Bentonville gradually accepted Rosa as well. It helped that she was no longer just the foreign cook, but Mrs. Morrison, wife of one of the most respected ranchers in the county. It helped that she volunteered at the church, donated food to families in need, and treated everyone with kindness regardless of how they had treated her in the past. Even Evelyn Pritchard eventually offered a grudging nod of greeting when they passed on the street, though they would never be friends. Rosa's proudest moment came 3 years after her arrival in Arkansas, when she stood in the Bentonville courthouse and took the oath to become an American citizen. Zachary stood beside her, holding Jamie, and her mother and sisters witnessed the ceremony with tears of joy. Rosa was still proudly Italian, still spoke with her musical accent, still cooked the food of her homeland. But now she was also American, fully and legally belonging to this country she had chosen. That night, Zachary presented her with a gift, a leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover. "I thought you might want to write down your story," he explained. "For Jamie, for future children, so they know where they came from and what you overcame to get here." Rosa traced the letters of her name with one finger. "What I overcame," she repeated softly. "Zachary, you make it sound like I do something heroic. I just try to survive to make a better life." "That is heroic," he insisted. "You left everything you knew, crossed an ocean, faced mockery and rejection, and never gave up. You built a life through sheer determination and courage. Our children should know that. They should know their mother is remarkable." Rosa leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I could not do any of it without you. That day in Bentonville when those women mock me and I feel so alone, so hopeless, then you speak to me. You tell me my voice is sweet like music. That was the first time in America someone make me feel like I have value. You've always had value, Rosa. I just recognized it." Zachary kissed the top of her head. "And you've made my life immeasurably richer. I was sleepwalking before I met you, just going through the motions. You woke me up, showed me what real partnership and love could be." Their family grew over the years. 2 years after Jamie came a daughter they named Catherine Rose Morrison, with her father's height and her mother's expressive eyes. Then another son, Thomas Anthony, who was stubborn and adventurous from the day he was born. The ranch prospered under Zachary's management, and when his father retired, the transition was smooth and natural. Rosa eventually stopped working in the cookhouse to focus on raising their children, though she never lost her love of cooking. The kitchen in the main house became the heart of their home, always filled with delicious smells, always welcoming to visitors. Ranch hands knew they could knock on the door and be fed, and traveling workers found the Morrison Ranch a place of unexpected hospitality. As the children grew, Rosa made sure they understood both sides of their heritage. They learned American history and Italian language, heard stories about their grandfather who died too young in Naples, and their other grandfather who built a ranch from raw prairie. They were taught to work hard, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their background, and to value kindness over social status. Jamie inherited his father's ranching skills and his mother's determination. Catherine showed musical talent and a gift for languages that reminded everyone of Rosa. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into scrapes but with such charm and good humor that he was impossible to stay angry with. The years brought changes to Bentonville as well. The town grew, adding new businesses and families. The railroad came through in 1891, connecting the region more fully to the broader nation. Immigration increased, and the Morrison family's example helped pave the way for other foreign-born residents to find acceptance. Rosa took quiet pride in knowing that her persistence and dignity had made things even slightly easier for those who came after her. Lucia married a schoolteacher and became an educator herself, passionate about teaching immigrant children. Sophia married a printer and began producing beautiful illustrated books. Maria lived to see all her daughters happily settled and her grandchildren thriving in this new country. When she died peacefully in her sleep at age 63, the whole county came to her funeral, a testament to the respect the Fontaine family had earned. Rosa and Zachary grew older together with the comfortable ease of two people perfectly suited to one another. Their love, which had begun with an act of kindness on a dusty street, deepened into something both powerful and tender. They had their disagreements, of course, the normal frictions of any marriage, but they never forgot what they had overcome to be together or took their partnership for granted. One evening when they were in their 50s, sitting on the porch watching the sun set over their land, Zachary reached for Rosa's hand. Their fingers intertwined automatically, a gesture repeated so many thousands of times it had become muscle memory. "You ever regret it?" Rosa asked suddenly. "Marrying me, I mean. Your life would have been simpler if you had chosen someone like Evelyn Pritchard." Zachary turned to look at her, his gray-green eyes still as striking as they had been 30 years earlier, though now framed by laugh lines and the silver threading through his dark hair. "Are you serious right now? Rosa, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me 3 incredible children, helped me build this ranch into something I'm proud of, and filled my life with love and meaning. Why would I want simple when I could have extraordinary?" Rosa smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I still have the accent, you know. After all these years in America, I still sound like foreigner." "Good," Zachary said firmly. "I love your accent. Remember what I told you that first day? Your voice is the sweetest I've heard. That hasn't changed." "It will never change." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Jamie's children visiting for the weekend. The sound of childish laughter and the occasional call of "na, look at this," made Rosa's heart full. "I have been thinking," Rosa said after a while, "about that day in Bentonville. The day we meet. If those women had not been so cruel, if your father had offered me job in the store, I would never have been standing outside when you came out. We might never have met." "I don't believe that," Zachary said. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Rosa wasn't sure she believed in fate quite that strongly, but she appreciated the sentiment. What she did believe was that kindness mattered, that taking a chance on someone could change lives, and that love could bridge any difference if both people were willing to put in the work. As they aged, Rosa made sure to document their story in the journal Zachary had given her. She wrote about arriving in America with nothing but hope, about facing mockery and rejection, about the cowboy who saw beauty in her differences rather than something to be corrected. She wrote about building a life from scratch, about raising children who belonged fully to both their Italian heritage and their American present. Their grandchildren loved the stories, especially the tale of how their grandfather had defended their grandmother against small-minded people who mocked her accent. Young Marcus, Jamie's eldest, declared that grandfather Zach was a hero, which made both Rosa and Zachary laugh. "He is a hero," Rosa told the boy seriously. "Not because he fights with guns or fists, but because he fights with kindness and respect. That is the hardest kind of bravery." By the time Rosa and Zachary reached their 60s, the ranch was a thriving operation run by Jamie with input from his father and help from his siblings. Catherine had married and lived in Little Rock, but visited frequently with her family. Thomas had become a veterinarian, using his love of animals in service to ranches throughout the county. The original ranch hands had long since retired or passed on, but their legend lived on among the newer workers. Stories about Rosa's first dinner, when she won over the skeptical cowboys with her cooking, became part of ranch folklore. Tommy Baker, now elderly and working as a handyman in town, still lit up when talking about the young Italian woman who had arrived with nothing but courage and determination. One spring afternoon, Rosa was in her garden, planting tomatoes brought from seeds that traced their lineage back to her mother's garden in Italy. Zachary came out to join her, moving a bit more stiffly than he once had but still strong and capable. "Letter came from the county," he said, settling onto the bench nearby. "They want to honor you at the Bentonville Spring Festival. Recognize your contributions to the community, especially helping immigrant families get established." Rosa sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of gray hair off her forehead. "Me? Why me? I just help people when I can. That's exactly why. Rosa, you have no idea how many lives you've touched. The families you helped find housing and work. The women you taught to cook American food while keeping their own traditions alive. The way you've always been willing to translate or explain customs, or just be a friendly face to someone new in town. Zachary smiled at her. You're a pillar of this community, whether you realize it or not. Rosa was honored at the festival, a deeply uncomfortable experience for someone who preferred to work behind the scenes. But seeing the faces of the families she had helped, hearing their testimonials about her kindness and generosity, made the embarrassment worthwhile. The mayor, a young man who had been a child when Rosa first arrived in Bentonville, gave a speech about how America's strength came from people like her who brought their talents and traditions while embracing their new home. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached Rosa hesitantly. It took Rosa a moment to recognize Evelyn Pritchard, now stooped and frail but still sharp-eyed. "Mrs. Morrison," Evelyn said stiffly, "I wanted to say something. I was wrong about you back when you first came to town. I was cruel and small-minded. I am sorry for that." Rosa studied the woman who had made her first days in Bentonville so difficult. She could have held a grudge, could have given Evelyn a taste of rejection. Instead, she smiled warmly and took the elderly woman's hand. "We all make mistakes," Rosa said gently. "What matters is we learn from them." "Thank you for telling me this." Evelyn's eyes grew damp. "You are a better woman than I ever was." "No," Rosa corrected. "I am just someone who knows what it is to be on the outside. That teaches you to be kind." That evening, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all gathered for the festival celebration, Rosa felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark days when she first arrived in America, feeling lost and alone. Not just survival, but belonging, community, family, love. Zachary found her sitting apart from the crowd for a moment, just watching everyone with a soft smile on her face. He lowered himself onto the grass beside her with a slight groan. "Getting old," he complained good-naturedly. "Knees aren't what they used to be." "You are still the handsomest cowboy in Arkansas," Rosa assured him, leaning against his shoulder in the familiar gesture that had become their signature over the decades. "And you're still the woman with the sweetest voice I've ever heard," Zachary replied, kissing her temple. "Funny how some things never change." "Some things should not change," Rosa agreed. "The important things, the true things, they stay the same even when everything else shifts." They sat together watching their legacy play out before them in the form of children and grandchildren, who carried both Italian and American blood, who spoke multiple languages, who understood that heritage was something to be proud of rather than hidden. These young people would face their own challenges, Rosa knew, but they would face them with the strength that came from knowing where they came from and the love that had built their family. As the sun set on another perfect Arkansas day, Rosa reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her here. From a poor village in southern Italy to this prosperous ranch, from a mocked immigrant to an honored member of the community, from a girl with nothing but hope to a woman surrounded by love. It had not been easy. There had been hardship and heartbreak, prejudice and pain. But there had also been Zachary. There had been kindness when she needed it most. There had been the opportunity to build something beautiful from very little. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, recognizing the faraway look in her eyes. "Everything," Rosa said simply. "All of it. The whole impossible, wonderful story." "Best story I know," Zachary agreed. "And the best part is we got to live it together." The years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. Rosa and Zachary celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 4 generations of family. The celebration was held at the ranch, of course, in the barn that had hosted their original wedding and countless gatherings since. Someone had found their wedding photograph, faded now but still showing the young couple's radiant happiness, and it was displayed prominently alongside more recent pictures charting their life together. Their children made speeches. Jamie talked about his parents' partnership, how they had built the ranch together through good times and bad. Catherine spoke about her mother's courage and her father's open heart. Thomas told humorous stories about growing up with parents who came from different worlds but created something uniquely their own. But the most touching moment came when Marcus, now a teenager, stood up to speak. "My great-grandmother came to America with nothing," he said, his voice clear and strong. "She faced people who said she did not belong, that her voice sounded wrong, that she should go back where she came from. But my great-grandfather heard something different. He heard music. He heard beauty. He heard home." The boy paused, looking directly at his great-grandparents. "Because of that, because one person chose kindness when others chose cruelty, all of us exist. Our whole family, everything we are, started with that choice. That is the legacy I want to carry forward." There was not a dry eye in the barn. Rosa clutched Zachary's hand, overwhelmed by emotion. To know that their love had created all of this, that their decision to choose each other despite the obstacles had rippled forward through time to touch so many lives, was almost too much to comprehend. That night, alone in their bedroom after all the guests had left, Rosa and Zachary lay in the bed they had shared for 50 years. The same room in the main house, though they had redecorated many times over the decades. The moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the walls. 50 years, Rosa murmured. "Half a century, Zachary. Where did it go?" "Into every good thing we have," Zachary replied. "Into our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, this community. It went into loving you every single day." Rosa turned to face him, studying the beloved face that had aged alongside her own. The gray-green eyes were dimmer now, the face more lined, the hair completely silver. But he was still her Zachary, still the man who had seen her worth when no one else had. "I love you," she said simply. "More today than 50 years ago, if that is possible." "It is possible," Zachary assured her, "because love is not static. It grows and deepens and becomes more itself with time." They drifted off to sleep hand in hand, the way they had most nights for 5 decades. Zachary passed away peacefully 3 years later in his sleep, with Rosa beside him. He was 76 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The funeral brought people from all over the county and beyond, a testament to the respect he had earned and the lives he had touched. Rosa stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said goodbye to the love of her life with a grief that was profound, but also laced with gratitude. They had been given more time together than many couples received, and they had made the most of every moment. In the months that followed, Rosa struggled with loneliness. After 53 years of marriage, the house felt too empty, too quiet. But her family surrounded her with love, and she found purpose in spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories and recipes and wisdom she had accumulated over her long life. She lived for more years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. On a spring morning when the wildflowers bloomed across the ranch land, and the sky was that perfect shade of blue she had come to associate with Arkansas, Rosa passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 81. Her funeral was even larger than Zachary's had been. People came from distant states, former ranch hands and their families, immigrant families she had helped over the years, business partners, community leaders, and countless others whose lives she had touched. The service was bilingual, conducted in both English and Italian, honoring both sides of her identity. Jamie gave the eulogy, speaking about his mother's extraordinary journey from poverty in Italy to becoming one of the most respected women in Benton County. He talked about her strength, her kindness, her refusal to let prejudice and hardship break her spirit. He talked about the love story between his parents, how his father had heard beauty where others heard only difference, and how that one act of recognition had changed the course of so many lives. "My mother used to say that kindness was the only thing that mattered in the end," Jamie concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "That we would be remembered not for what we accumulated but for how we treated others, especially those who were vulnerable or different." She lived that truth every day of her life. And now we, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, carry that legacy forward. We carry her story, her strength, her kindness. She will never be forgotten. Rosa was buried beside Zachary under a spreading oak tree on the ranch property, with headstones that bore their names, dates, and a simple inscription. Their love built a legacy. In the years that followed, the Morrison Ranch remained a thriving family operation, passed down through the generations. The story of Rosa and Zachary became part of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The journal Rosa had kept, documenting her journey and their life together, was carefully preserved and eventually published as a local history, inspiring countless others who faced their own challenges of immigration and acceptance. The cookhouse, where Rosa had proved herself on that first evening, was preserved as a historical landmark, a reminder of humble beginnings and the power of determination. The town of Bentonville grew into a small city, but it never forgot the Italian immigrant who had become one of its most cherished citizens. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Arkansas prairie painting the sky in gold and purple, those who knew the story would swear they could hear the echo of a long-ago conversation, a cowboy's voice saying with unmistakable warmth, "Your voice is the sweetest I've heard," and a woman's musical laugh in response, an accent that had once been mocked transformed into something beautiful by the alchemy of love and recognition. The legacy was not just in the ranch or the family that continued to grow and prosper. It was in the lesson that had been lived rather than merely spoken, that every person has value, that differences should be celebrated rather than scorned, and that one act of kindness, one moment of seeing someone truly and recognizing their worth, can ripple forward through generations, creating beauty and love where there might have been only bitterness and loss. Rosa had crossed an ocean seeking opportunity. She had found it, but more importantly, she had found home. Not just a place, but a person who became her partner, her champion, her great love. And in finding him and building a life together, she had created something that would endure long after both of them had gone. A family that knew where it came from, a community that was richer for her presence, and a story that would be told as long as there were people to remember that love, real love, sees past surface differences to the essential humanity beneath. On the Morrison Ranch in Bentonville, Arkansas, where once a young Italian immigrant had stood in a cookhouse wondering if she could prove herself worthy of staying, her great-great-grandchildren now played and learned and grew. They spoke English primarily, but many also spoke Italian, keeping that connection alive. They learned to cook both American and Italian food, blending traditions the way their great-great-grandmother had done. They were taught about prejudice and kindness, about courage and determination, about the power of seeing value in people who might seem different. And they knew, with the certainty that comes from being raised in love and security, that they were the descendants of something special, A foreign girl with an accent and a cowboy with an open heart had met on a dusty street in 1883 and chosen each other despite every obstacle. That choice had created them, had given them this legacy of love and acceptance and possibility. It was, in the end, a very simple story. A woman was mocked for how she spoke. A man told her she sounded beautiful. They fell in love, built a life, raised a family, and changed their corner of the world for the better. Simple, but also miraculous, the way the best love stories always are. And if you had asked Rosa, in those final peaceful days before she closed her eyes for the last time, whether she had any regrets about leaving Italy, about facing the hardships she had endured, about the long, difficult journey that had brought her to Arkansas, she would have smiled that soft smile of hers and shaken her head. No regrets, she would have said in that accent that never quite left her, the accent Zachary had loved from the first moment he heard it. Everything, all of it, it brings me to him. It brings me to this life, this family, this love. I would do it all again, every hard moment, because this is where I was meant to be. This is home. And that really was the whole story. A woman found home not in a place but in a person who loved her exactly as she was, accent and all. And from that love, everything else followed. Family, belonging, legacy, the rippling forward of kindness through time. It was the oldest story in the world, and yet it was uniquely theirs, carved out of determination and hope, and the simple revolutionary act of choosing love over prejudice. The sun set countless times over the Morrison ranch, and each sunset was beautiful in its own way. But none was more beautiful than those Rosa and Zachary had watched together, hand in hand, their voices mingling in conversation, his drawl and her Italian inflections creating a music that belonged only to them. That music faded when they passed, but its echo remained, would always remain, in the family they created and the love they shared, and the example they set for anyone who ever felt like an outsider, like someone whose voice was wrong, like they didn't belong. Because Rosa and Zachary proved that belonging is not about where you come from or how you sound. It is about finding someone who hears you, really hears you, and says, yes, you, exactly as you are, that is what I choose. And when you are fortunate enough to find that, when someone looks past all the surface differences to see the person beneath and declares you worthy of love, well, that is when you know you are finally, truly home.